Medigroup Physician Services presents Medigroup's Frank's Fast Five with Healthcare Executives, produced by Bridget Wilson and Carrie Peters. Today's guest is Guillermo Ramas, founder and chief executive officer of Notisphere. Now, here's your host, Medigroup's Frank Gillespie.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Medigroup's Frank's Fast Five with Healthcare Executives. Today, I have the pleasure of being with Guillermo Ramas, Chief Executive Officer for Notisphere. Welcome, Guillermo. How are you?
Hi, Frank. It's great to be here.
It's an honor to have you, and we're so thankful and grateful that you said yes. You never know what you're getting into on these things, so we really appreciate it. Well, you know what? I promised you, I know you're a busy man. I promised you wouldn't waste your time, so I'm going to dive right into these questions.
Let's go into it.
Yes, sir. Guillermo, could you share a bit about your experience in the healthcare industry and also when and why you founded Notisphere?
Sure. I actually got to the U.S. in '96, and I've worked. So my background before that was business. I went to college, studied business, administration, and economics. Sure. But when I came to the U.S., I landed in a company that was in healthcare. It was actually called Shared Medical Systems, which is, then got bought by Siemens, now Cerner. I've dedicated, pretty much 26 years to healthcare supply chain, mostly technology focused on supply chain, right? So sure. I was fortunate enough to land a consulting job implementing ERP systems in healthcare provider organizations. That gave me quite a bit of an opportunity to learn a lot of the challenges in procurement for providers. And then I joined what is now Vizient, and I worked there for 7 years in charge of analytics for hospital-facing products, coming up with applications. That gave me even a greater opportunity to understand all of these challenges and dynamics. And then you asked me, when and why I created Notisphere.
Yes, sir.
And so it was a couple of years ago, actually. I was volunteering for at a task force to come up with recommendations to improve the recall process in the industry.
Okay.
And what was fascinating to me was, as much as I knew about the provider side of the industry and the challenges that they have with recalls, I suddenly realized I knew nothing about the challenges the suppliers were facing, and found out and learned that there are plenty. And so having that opportunity to see both sides and understand kind of why this was happening gave me the idea of, okay, we can solve this. That there are ways to actually get people connected the right way. And so I decided to go do it.
That's fantastic. The entrepreneur in you came right out. That's awesome.
It was one of those, aha moments where you say, okay, nobody's done it in 40 years. So
you seize the moment. Good for you.
Let's roll our sleeves up, right? And get it done. Yeah.
It's never as easy as just seizing the moment. You do have to roll up your sleeves, no question.
You do. And do a lot of research, a lot of work, a lot of talking. But I'm lucky. I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have a lot of contacts in the industry because of all of these years. And that makes it, it makes it doable.
Absolutely. One of the things I learned early on, I've been doing this for 30 plus years, never burn a bridge.
That's it.
You never want to do that. And I learned something new just in what you just told me. I didn't know that you had worked for Vizient. So I worked for the former Med Assets for 15 years. So
all right. There you go.
We were talking about Rand Ballard before the beginning of our script here. And, it's come full circle with Rand as well. So you came from a good grassroots organization there. That's awesome. I'm going to move on to our next question, and thank you for your responses to the first question. Guillermo, so our listeners know, Notisphere's core focus is recall management. You briefly touched on that. Maybe elaborate a little bit more about what that is and why that is an effective and important communication strategy in healthcare.
Sure, correct. So, and you are right. So our main focus is recall alerts, and it's the delivery of the alerts and related communications from the supplier to the provider. The reason that's very important is today we've conducted studies with large provider organizations where we've been able to validate that any given provider organization today is at least doing 5 times more work than they should be doing when dealing with recalls. And the reason for that is the number of recalls has exploded. And, the way that the industry is dealing with this today is not efficient, right? It becomes kind of drinking from a fire hose, looking at everything, trying to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. If you take a more targeted approach, then you can reduce the amount of work. And that's important for a couple of different reasons. Probably the most important one, obviously, is there are quite a few patients being affected and hurt today, even after a recall is issued, right? So if the alert doesn't show up fast enough or to the right person, then you have all of these side effects of patients being affected by products that have been recalled. And this happens. The other thing that, and I'll give you an example of this. If a recall takes 3 weeks, a recall alert takes 3 weeks or more to reach the right person at a hospital, and the recall is about an implantable, and you're walking in tomorrow to have that implantable implanted in you, that's a problem.
Absolutely.
So that's one thing. The other thing that I will say is also important is many times what all of this current processing used by the industry results in is nurses being asked to go check shelves and floors, et cetera, right? Well, as you can imagine, if you're a nurse, you want to be caring for patients. You don't want to be doing inventory checks.
Absolutely.
Okay? So if we can reduce that by 80%, right, that's more time to care for patients, and it's better. And then lastly, the other thing I'll say is, and this is especially true when it comes to non-acute organizations, provider organizations. There's issues with staffing today, staffing shortages, turnover, et cetera. Folks are maintaining paper records of things that are being done or not done for certain recalls, right? These organizations need to be able to validate and report on these things and make sure that they acted on them, et cetera. So if you can make all that immediate, electronic, and centralized, you're saving time, you're saving effort, and you're saving rework.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
well, no, and a great point on the non-acute care side. I mean, certainly it's important on the acute care side as well, but you have, and they're still short-staffed too, but you have ancillary people that do these types of things versus your clinicians. And on the non-acute care side, some of your larger non-acute care facilities do have some ancillary staff that can do this, but the more moderate or middle-sized type of non-acute care facility, it doesn't have that luxury. And, the clinicians were trained to be clinicians, not people that search out these types of things. So your point's well taken, and therefore the service is even more valuable.
For sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Awesome. I'm learning a bunch here. Guillermo, is Notisphere primarily focused on medical device recalls, or are there other features supported by Notisphere?
Yeah, that's a great question, Frank. So initially, the medical device recalls or med-surg supplies kind of were the initial focus or the first focus we had, mainly because it was the easiest one to kind of wrap our head around.
Sure.
But that's not the only thing we do. So you can cover, we cover pharmacy. We certainly cater to anything that has to do with clinical engineering. I think the key is on the recall side of things, there's plenty that we can cover. I think the only thing we're not covering today or touching is food.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay, wow. That's huge.
And also because, when we say recalls, a lot of people will be thinking about just pulling something off a shelf and not using it.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, when we talk about recalls and when the FDA says recalls, what they really mean is all sorts of different notices around supplies, right? So it's product advisories, field service alerts, all sorts of different things that need to be communicated to the folks that deal with those items. And then lastly, I would say there's other types of communications that we're also covering as well and addressing, right? That go a little bit beyond recalls, but still have to do with supply disruptions.
Got it.
So
you cover the whole spectrum. I mean, you don't just identify what the recall is and put a note out there. You're doing the whole picture.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really
yeah. And in fact, what I would say, because you just said, put a note out there, I think the key for us is we don't broadcast to the entire population, because what we take pride in is in solving the problem of folks getting alerts that don't belong to them, right? That don't really affect them. So what we do is a very focused, if you're receiving an alert, you are affected. There's no having to worry about, let me go check.
Right.
If you get it, you are affected for sure.
Filter through all the emails to see which one applies to you. If you're getting the email, you better take some action or pay attention.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Very cool. So, as founder of Notisphere, is there a key beginning strategy that you still follow or revert back today that keeps you progressing forward? Was there something that got you started and you're like, you fall back on that a lot that keeps you moving forward?
Yes, absolutely. If you think about it, I was really, really fortunate to be in this task force, like I mentioned earlier, where I had suppliers, and providers in the same room. So I was able to connect those dots, right? And start listening very carefully to what was the real headaches for each one of the sides of this industry. We keep doing that every day. Every piece of functionality, every field, every little bit of information that we have, and every screen is a result of feedback and input from providers and suppliers. Whoops. Sorry for that.
That's all right. Another recall just came in.
It's kind of. It's my daughter. So, so we make it a priority to take in all of this input and feedback. And in fact, even sometimes before releasing any additional new functionality, we will put these kind of sketches in front of folks to have them react and say, well, how would this work, right? We don't do anything without validation from providers and suppliers, right? Which are, at the end of the day, our end users.
That makes perfect sense. You're taking the input from the people who are actually pushing the buttons and shuffling the papers on the user end. So no, that makes perfect sense.
I will add, Frank, though, that while we do that, there's another principle we also apply, which is we are always trying to think about the stuff that our partners or providers and suppliers don't know necessarily they should be thinking about today.
Got it.
Or aren't thinking about, right? So at the end of the day, I always say, if you want to be a real good partner, be thinking about the stuff that your customers will need to be thinking about eventually, but they might not be thinking about today. If not, all you're doing is just doing whatever somebody tells you, but you're not really providing that kind of additional layer of innovation, right? So we play those two layers together.
You complement both sides.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. That's a win-win. Okay, last question. These go fast, and you've been awesome. Thank you so much. Guillermo, this is a fun question typically. What is a favorite hobby for you, or what do you do for fun?
That's an interesting one for me, because my hobbies and my interests vary over time and they evolve. I can tell you that during COVID, I took up vintage motorcycle restoration.
Holy cow.
So I've been a motorcycle rider for many years, but suddenly it was like, well, we have a little bit more time than we thought we would on our hands. And I started restoring motorcycles until one day I realized I had, my garage now was basically hosting 9 motorcycles and various projects. I thinned the herd now to 3.
Okay.
Because it got out of control. But hobbies are plenty, things like that. There's a lot, interestingly enough, I go to the analog stuff a lot, although I work in technology. So I have a 1969 Volkswagen bus. I listen to vintage audio equipment, right, from the 60s.
I love it.
So it's a good balance, right? On one end, you're looking at technology and looking at very advanced stuff. And on the other hand, you're balancing that with going old school for other things.
Great answer. You're well diversified in your hobby world. I love it. Well, Guillermo, that's the end of the 5 questions. And I honestly, awesome. I mean, fascinating. I learned some stuff and I got to meet a nice person here. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time and thank you for sharing the information with the audience.
Likewise, Frank. It's been a pleasure, and it's been great meeting you as well.
I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I look forward to working with you moving forward.
Same here, Frank.
This has been MediGroup's Frank's Fast Five with Healthcare Executives, produced by Bridget Wilson and Carrie Peters, and hosted by Frank Gillespie. Special thanks to Guillermo Ramas, founder and chief executive officer with Notisphere. This has been a presentation of MediGroup Physician Services.